One of the greatest forces for positive good in America has been Christianity. It's produced the abolition movement, anti-slavery movement. It's produced the civil rights movement. It's produced common education, open education for all individuals. It brought an end to the child labor movement. It did the urban renewal. It's done so much positive good, and yet it's under attack more than any other single area of American culture. Is this one area that's done so much positive good. And it's really under attack in a lot of different arenas. In any culture, in any nation, you have four major institutions that will shape that culture. Those institutions tend to be judiciary and government. They tend to be education, tend to be media and entertainment, and the fourth institution is the pulpit and the church. Essentially, Christianity has given up 3.5 institutions out of the four.
Wow.
Now, judiciary has come after Christianity, really squeezed it into a box. Education's attacked it. We've seen the revisionism and how we've changed our textbooks. We don't talk about what Christianity did in America's history. We've really seen Hollywood and media and news come after Christians and vilify them and demonize them. And then even in the pulpit, it's gotten to where we've kind of given up half the pulpit. We kind of let the IRS and government tell us what we can and can't say in church. And so pastors don't even have the same right of free speech that every other citizen in America does. So we've been really squeezed down in all these areas. And as a consequence, the church is having less impact on the culture now than it's ever had in American history. Did you know that American ministers used to stand in the pulpit and call candidates by name, call parties by name, set forth their positions, compare them to the Bible, and then advise that a Christian could or could not vote for a candidate based on what the candidate had said and what the Bible said? Today, this type of sermon might make many in churches uncomfortable, but it shouldn't. For not only was this a traditional practice of American pulpits, it's also a traditional practice set forth in the Scriptures. Consider how often God sent His ministers either to interface with or to confront civil leaders. For example, Elijah with Ahab and Jezebel, Samuel with Saul, Nathan and Gad with David, Isaiah with Manasseh, and so many other examples. There certainly is no model in the Bible where God has His ministers remain silent with civil leaders or about civil issues. The church speaking into the civil arena has been a long-standing practice in America, as had the practice of ministers serving directly in the legislature. In fact, it was Thomas Jefferson himself who encouraged the lifting of restrictions against ministers and clergy that had been imposed in his own state of Virginia. He declared,
I observe in the Virginia Constitution an abridgment of a right I do not approve. It is the incapacitation of a clergyman from being elected.
Thomas Jefferson wished to see clergymen possess the same rights as others. Today, however, this is not the case in the area of free speech, nor has it been since 1954, when a U.S. Senator became responsible for enacting a policy that treated nonprofit organizations, including churches, differently. He had been criticized for his political affiliations and his private business dealings, and not liking that criticism, he added a rider to an appropriation bill in the U.S. Senate, stipulating for the first time that a 501c3 organization, and churches are 501c3 organizations, that they must now stay out of the political arena. Most Christians think that the way it is today is the way it's always been. But this restriction is recent, as both American law books and early American sermons clearly demonstrate. The record is clear. The church helped shape the way that early America approached the issues of the day, and having taught the nation the relevancy of God's Word to every aspect of life, it's not surprising then that the Scriptures and writers on the Scriptures had such a profound impact on the founding of our government and its documents.
You're talking about four main systems we have been squeezed out of, as it were, as you're saying, and influence is really what we're supposed to have in this life. I mean,
exactly.
basically.
We're supposed to be influenced in this life. We're supposed to be salt and light. We're supposed to get into all these arenas,
right,
and we've pulled out of them. And part of it is, quite frankly, we're pretty wimpy. We don't like conflict. You know, we're not going to go for conflict. And so, oh man, if they're going to attack me, I'm going to go start my own group somewhere and we'll hide over here where they can't come after me.
Right.
We're less willing to stand up and confront and say, that is not true and here is the truth. We say, well, you know, let's not get into a controversy over this. And you can't do that. I mean, I look even at the media, how much we've given up in the media. When you go back and look, for example, at the Denver Post after World War II, you'll find that on Monday morning, in most national papers, they would reprint several of the sermons that were preached on Sunday. So if you missed church on Sunday, you could read some good sermons on Monday morning. And you go, I don't think the media is quite like that today. It's not quite that friendly. Why was that? You see, all of these institutions, interesting thing about institutions is institutions have no intrinsic value on their own. Institutions are just like cars. They take on the nature of whoever's behind the wheel.
Got it.
What's happened is we bailed out of media and entertainment.
Right.
We bailed out of education. Oh,
Right.
man, it's really tough to deal with those negative, atheistic, agnostic, secularist, postmodern professors. We think we'll go start our own Christian schools. Nothing wrong with starting Christian schools, but what we do is we don't engage the culture. Despite the rich heritage of Christian faith and expression in America, and despite the strong foundation that is provided for our country, things have begun to change. In only a few short decades, hundreds of years of religious freedoms have been erased. While there have been scores of horrible rulings by courts, perhaps none is any more egregious than this recent case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's called Jane Doe versus Santa Fe Independent School District. Santa Fe is a small rural town outside of Houston, Texas, and they have a long tradition of prayer at graduations and prayer at athletic events like football games. Yet a handful of students in that school didn't want anyone else praying. They were offended. So they went to a federal judge and asked him to make everyone else stop praying. The judge ruled that he would allow prayer to continue at graduations and athletic events, but only if students prayed the right words when they prayed. He ruled,
"The court will allow that prayer to be a typical non-denominational prayer, which can refer to God or the Almighty or that sort of thing. The prayer must not refer to Jesus or anyone else. And make no mistake, the court is going to have a United States Marshal in attendance at the graduation. If any student offends this court, that student will be summarily arrested and will face up to 6 months incarceration in the Galveston County Jail for contempt of court. Anybody who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish that he or she had died as a child when this court gets through with it."
died as a child? If you pray the wrong words in a prayer, you're going to wish that you had died as a child when this court gets through with you? This ruling obviously angers most citizens.
The rich spiritual heritage and religious beliefs of our founding fathers is met with increasing hostility in the political arena. What can history tell us about the success or failure of mixing religious faith with political influence? And what role does a citizen play in maintaining the spiritual integrity of our nation? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
Today's pseudo-historians, not willing to let truth or historical facts stand in the way of their personal secularist convictions, declare just the opposite, asserting that neither our nation nor its leaders were influenced by Christianity. For example, this article declares, "Our founding presidents were not Christians." This article similarly announces, "The founding fathers were not Christians." Notice the emphasis on the word not. This article proclaims that the signers of the Declaration were enemies of Christ. And the LA Times heralds America's unchristian beginnings with an inset box declaring, "The founding fathers, most, despite the preachings of our pious right, were deists who rejected the divinity of Jesus." In short, according to these and many other writers, our founding fathers were a collective group of atheists, agnostics, and deists. They didn't believe in Jesus. They weren't Christians. And since our founders were apparently nothing more than a group of atheists, agnostics, and deists, then the title of this current university textbook seems to make complete sense: The Godless Constitution. Many Americans today would not disagree with these characterizations of the Founding Fathers. After all, if you look at the painting of the signers of the Declaration, who are the two founders that all Americans can immediately recognize? Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, of course. But wait, don't stop there. Which one is Samuel Huntington? Or Robert Livingston? Or George Clinton? Or Robert Morris? Or Stephen Hopkins? Or Richard Henry Lee? Or George Reed? Or Roger Sherman? Or Elbridge Gerry? Or the others? We don't seem to know anything about these signers. Isn't it interesting that we've been trained to recognize the two least religious founding fathers, Franklin and Jefferson? We don't know the others, but we're told that they were just like Franklin and Jefferson. Actually, in defense of Franklin and Jefferson, while they are the two least religious founders, least is a comparative term. They are the least religious of the group, but even they're more religious than most religious individuals today. After all, Benjamin Franklin recommended